right, we're going to take notes on the legislative branch today. So if you were absent or online or just want to review, you can review the notes. So in the Constitution, it's organized into preamble, articles, and amendments. We've talked about the preamble and the amendments. Now we're going to talk about the articles, which actually lay out how our government works. In Article 1, the first article of the Constitution is the legislative branch, which is also called Congress. So we're talking about the U.S. Congress, which is our legislative branch. A couple of vocab words here, nothing overly important. A term is the length of time between elections in Congress, which is 2 years. So I think this is the 117th Congress, because the PowerPoint's a little out of date there. All right, so what are the congressional duties of Congress? The main duties of our legislative branch is to make the laws, right? So you're in second, third grade, you're learning about the three-branch government. The legislative branch of the U.S. government makes the laws. Representatives represent their constituents from the states that they represent. They also give advice and consent on presidential appointments. That's an important one that the Senate does. So the Congress is broken into two parts, the House of Representatives and the Senate. And so when the president chooses someone he wants to work for him, whether it's a judge or a cabinet member, the Senate has to give advice and consent, basically has to approve them. They can impeach government officials, which has just happened recently with the second impeachment of Donald Trump. They can impeach executive or judicial branch people who have broken the law or not doing what they're supposed to. They can also propose amendments. If you remember the constitutional amendment process, 2/3 of both houses of Congress can propose an amendment. And they also have investigations and oversights. That's something they're doing a lot now with the Capitol Hill riots a couple weeks ago. They are investigating what happened to see if there was a failure or any illegal actions on anyone's parts. But the main one there is make the laws, but they also have some other jobs as well. All right, so Congress, in the Constitution, there's two different types of powers they have. Basically, powers that are explicitly written, those are called enumerated or delegated powers. That's a vocab word you need to know. These are powers that are specifically listed in the Constitution. The Congress shall have the power to do these things. These are also known as delegated powers. So what are some of their powers? To run a United States post office, to run the military, to coin money. And so there's some specific enumerated, that means just like numbered, or delegated. These are the powers specifically listed in the Constitution. So here's a list of them, right? So raise and collect taxes, regulate trade, coin money, the post office, declare war, make rules for the military, set naturalization rules, things like that. If you remember when we talked about the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, there were some things the national government couldn't do, like establish a military, regulate trade, collect taxes, have one set of money instead of 13. And so you see, we fixed a lot of these in the enumerated delegated powers. These are the things. So the big ones here: declare war, regulate trade, that's interstate trade between states, raise and collect taxes, coin money, run a post office. Coin money just means military. Now, there's another clause in the Constitution that's the necessary and proper clause. It's also called the elastic clause. And this gives Congress extra powers that aren't listed in the Constitution. What this basically says is anything you need to do to complete your delegated powers, you can also do that. And so what this has done, what elastic does, if you have elastic pants, they stretch, right? And so what this has done, the necessary and proper, or also known as the elastic clause, stretches the powers of Congress beyond what is just specifically listed in the Constitution. So an example of this, a delegated power that is specifically listed in the Constitution is the Congress has the right to raise and support an army. So an example of an implied power would be the selective service, the draft. It doesn't say that Congress has the right to implement a draft, but because that is necessary and proper to raise an army, that's what we call an implied power, or given to them by the elastic clause. So again, we have two types of power: delegated or enumerated powers, which are specifically listed. Congress can coin money, make a post office. And then we have implied powers given to us by the necessary and proper, or the elastic clause, which are bonus powers that Congress has that stretch the powers of Congress. So I just went over that. Okay, so what are some implied powers? So an enumerated or delegated power is that the Congress may collect taxes. What would an example of the elastic clause and implied powers that stretch the power of Congress? It doesn't say Congress has the right to create an IRS to regulate taxes, but because we need that to collect taxes, that's an implied power. So these are implied powers. They're not listed anywhere in the Constitution, but Congress still has these powers because the necessary and proper clause makes them necessary to do their delegated powers. So it doesn't say they can make laws punishing people who violate mail fraud. But because they have the right to run a post office, that would be an implied power given by the elastic clause. That's an important concept. We'll go over it a lot. All right, so what are some non-legislative duties? Besides making laws, what are some other things Congress can do? Number one, impeachment. This is a check and balance on the executive and judicial branch. If a member of the executive or judicial branch is not doing what they're supposed to or breaking the law, they can be impeached and removed from office. The Senate also gets to give advice and consent on treaties and presidential nominees. So Joe Biden right now is choosing his cabinet, people he wants to work for him, Attorney General, Secretary of State. All of those people have to be approved by the Senate. And that's called a nomination and confirmation. Congress can also propose amendments, which we talked about earlier, and they also can conduct investigations and oversight of important government matters. So impeachment, I talked a little bit about. Donald Trump now has been impeached twice by the House. They'll be having a trial soon in the Senate to see if he gets removed from office, even though he may already be out of office. But it's a way of making sure we can hold members of the executive and judicial branch accountable to the law. Kind of rule of law concept. This is an important one that you see on your EOC a lot. The president gets to choose people to work for him, ambassadors, Supreme Court justices, cabinet members, but they first must be approved by the Senate. So the president gets to choose people, but then the Senate has to give okay on it. If the Senate doesn't give okay, then that person doesn't get the job. So that's called confirmation of a presidential appointment. And so again, that's another example of checks and balances. Executive branch gets to choose someone. The legislative branch, Congress, gets to approve them. All right. If you remember back to the Constitutional Convention, we have a bicameral legislature, the Great Compromise. We have one House of Congress called the House of Representatives, which is based on population. We have one House of Congress called the Senate, where every state gets 2 members. So bicameral legislature, the Senate, every state has 2 members, 50 states, 100 members. House of Representatives is based on population. The more people you have, the more members. California, 55 members, 54, don't know off the top of my head. Hawaii, 1 or 2, right? And so there are 435 members in the House of Representatives. But again, when we're talking about the legislative branch, the U.S. Congress has a Senate and a House of Representatives. All right, we just went over this. There are different requirements to get the office. You only have to be 25 to be a member of the House. You have to be 30 to be a member of the Senate. And they also serve a different amount of term time. A House of Representative member is up for re-election every 2 years. So every 2 years, the entire House of Representatives is up for election. The Senate, a little bit more prestigious part of Congress with only 100 members, they're only up for election every 6 years. Okay, I went over that. Okay, so one thing you need to know about Congress also is kind of the organization of how they're organized. The leader of the House of Representatives is called the Speaker of the House. The Democrats or Republicans, whichever party has the majority, gets to choose a Speaker of the House, and that person is very, very powerful. They get to decide the committees that each member serves on, which bills get voted on. They're also third in line of succession to the president. So if the president or vice president, anything were to happen to them, the Speaker of the House becomes president. The current Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and so the leader of the House of Representatives is called the Speaker of the House. What special powers does the House have? All bills having to do with money start in the House. And they also get to write articles of impeachment, which they just did against President Trump. All right, the Senate, a little bit more prestigious. You have 6 years as your term. You have to be 30 years old and 9 years a citizen. The leader of the Senate is the vice president, actually, is the leader of the Senate. But they actually have very, very little power. The only power they have is if there's a 50-50 tie, they get to break the tie. There's another person in the Senate called the majority leader, and that is the party with the most representatives, Republican or Democrat, gets to be the majority leader. And that's sort of like the Speaker of the House. They get to decide committee members and order of the bills and what bills get voted on. And so that's a very powerful leader as well. That's going to be Chuck Schumer here next week. Okay. What is special powers of Senate? You need to know this. They get to confirm all treaties and presidential appointments. That's an important one. And in an impeachment, they get to act as a jury. So the first time Donald Trump was impeached by the House, the Senate did not find him guilty. 2/3 have to find him guilty and 2/3 didn't. We'll see what happened this time. That's just a summary. We're going to talk about how a bill becomes a law next week, and I'll have a video on that. All right, and there's the steps. All right, that's it. I know it was a lot. We'll obviously be going over it in class, and you can review this video if you have questions. All right.